Welcome to Element, the place where myth meets reality. A man who temporarily died believes he saw evidence that this world is full of beings not meant for this earth. Who gives his name as just Stephen was undergoing a simple operation when he began having trouble breathing. He began slipping out of consciousness and dreamt that he was flying around the room. He came back around initially, but the complications got worse until Stephen was temporarily, clinically dead. During this time, Stephen said he began flying around the room again, but this time he was joined by otherworldly beings, which took the form of lights. Stephen explained in the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation forum. As my eyes panned across, I looked up at the ceiling and could see many small oblong-shaped white lights, and they were randomly racing very fast in all directions and elevations along the ceiling. At that moment, I began to feel myself rise upwards, very slowly. As I was getting closer to the ceiling, the objects that I was seeing started to become less random, and they slowed down. I continued to rise and almost reached the ceiling. When I looked across the room, I saw that the lights had organized and become like a swimming school of fish. They were waving back and forth and doubling back on each other. They started in the far diagonal corner from me, and I thought how incredibly beautiful it was. Then I saw that they were getting closer to me. Then I was enveloped in the school of lights and became part of the wave. Suddenly, Stephen was back in his body after being resuscitated. However, he knew from that point on that we are not alone. Some researchers state these visions are normally phenomenon and not necessarily a sign of an afterlife. Dr. Pam Parnia, Director of Critical Care and Resuscitation Research at NYU, Langone School of Medicine in New York City, told a recent OzTalk, people describe a sensation of a bright, warm, welcoming light that draws people towards it. They describe a sensation of experiencing their deceased relatives almost as if they had come to welcome them. They often say that they didn't want to come back in many cases. It is so comfortable and it is like a magnet that draws them that they don't want to come back. A lot of people describe a sensation of separating from themselves and watching doctors and nurses working on them. Dr. Parnia says there are scientific explanations for the reaction and says seeing people is not evidence of the afterlife, but more likely the brain just scanning itself as a survival technique. When the heart stops, the blood supply to the brain is quickly cut off, and in operating theatres, this moment would be recorded as the official time of death. But studies show that the dead person's mind and consciousness continue to work, at least for a short time, meaning the deceased can recognize their own death. Indeed, there is some evidence to suggest the dead person may even hear their own death being announced as they lie on the operating theatre table. The implications for almost all the world's religions, which dictate a transfer of the soul at the moment of death, are profound. At this point, the person would both be dead and alive simultaneously, but well able to realize they were about to face annihilation. The macabre new studies also mirror the plotline of the Hollywood flick Flatliners. The film follows a group of medical students experimenting with near-death experiences by taking turns to chemically induce their heart to stop and flatline. In the movie, the stars experience some form of afterlife, but the reality of the new research is so much weirder and so much more frightening. Dr. Sampania, Director of Critical Care and Resuscitation Research at NYU Langone School of Medicine in New York City, said people in the first phase of death may still experience some form of consciousness. Once that happens, blood no longer circulates to the brain, which means brain function halts almost instantaneously. You lose all your brainstem reflexes, your gag reflex, your pupil reflex. all that is gone. Dr. Pania and his team continue to investigate the pervasiveness of consciousness after death with twin studies in Europe and the United States who have suffered cardiac arrest, in the largest study of its kind. He said, in the same way that a group of researchers might be studying the qualitative nature of the human experience of love, for instance, we're trying to understand the exact features that people experience when they go through death, because we understand that this is going to reflect the universal experience we're all going to have when we die. He added, we also study the human mind and consciousness in the context of death, to understand whether consciousness becomes annihilated or whether it continues after you've died for some period of time, and how that relates to what's happening inside the brain in real time. And the evidence reveals that people whose hearts stopped and then restarted, usually on the operating table, could describe exactly what had been happening around them. The new research is an extension of these findings. Dr. Pania told Live Science they'll describe watching doctors and nurses working, and they'll describe having awareness of full conversations, of visual things that were going on, that would otherwise not be known to them. Explaining the moment of death, he said, it's all based on the moment when the heart stops. Technically speaking, that's how you get the time of death. Scientists have offered a glimpse to the afterlife with a huge study on near-death experiences, or NDEs, with the most shocking finding suggesting that people see spirits when near to death. Many people claim to experience feelings of peacefulness, a sense of disconnection from the body, and visualization of bright lights. But new research has found that a large chunk of people claim to encounter ghostly orbs. A new study from Belgian researchers analyzed 154 individuals who had been on the brink of the afterlife to offer a peek into death. The responses were collected through the International Association for Near-Death Studies and the Coma Science Group, and analyzed by experts at the University of Liège. Charlotte Marshall, lead author of the study, said, to the best of our knowledge, no study has formally and rigorously investigated whether NDE features follow a fixed order or distribution. The aim of our study was to investigate the frequency distribution of these features, both globally and according to the position of features in narratives, as well as the most frequently reported temporarily sequences of the different near-death experience features. Some 80% of the participants who had been revived from the verge of death reported feeling extremely peaceful. 69% saw a bright light, but perhaps most shockingly, 64% believed that they encountered spirits of people. The least common experience was speeding thoughts and precognitive visions. Miss Marshall said, this suggests that near-death experiences seem to be regularly triggered by a sense of detachment from the physical body and end when returning to one's body. The most common sequence experienced by 22% of people was out-of-body experience, followed by experiencing a tunnel, seeing a bright light, and finally, a feeling of peace. Miss Marshall said, our findings suggest that near-death experiences may not feature all elements, and elements do not seem to appear in a fixed order. While near-death experiences may have a universal character so that they may exhibit enough common features to belong to the same phenomenon, we nevertheless observed a temporal variability within the distribution of reported features. This raises significant questions about what specific aspects of near-death experiences could be considered as universal and what not. Further research is necessary to explore these differences and the precise extent of which content of those experiences reflects their expectations and cultural backgrounds, as well as the neurophysiological mechanisms underlying near-death experiences. Thanks for choosing Element. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share and subscribe.